One of the myths about the invasion of the Americas by the white Europeans in 1492 that I find equally repulsive and appealing is the notion that the local inhabitants were unable to see what was in front of them on the horizon. It repulses me because of the implication about the alleged savagery of the local inhabitants, which justifies the perennial myth of the European civilizing mission. And it attracts me because the possibility of creating new words to describe new worlds is indeed intrinsic to my work as writer and curator. That's why Viola had a little hard time saying Afropean. The notion that Christopher Columbus and his 3 carabelas were an impossibility, a reality that they had no way of deciphering due to their lack of words for them, is both fascinating and terrifying. They simply did not see it coming. In the context of a European meeting of curators, artists, sociologists, and philosophers around the subject of political art, I realized that a very similar situation was being performed in front of me. As in the first minutes of work that we just saw by Australian Aboriginal artist Tracy Moffat, when the native Arawak watched European grit materialize in front of them in the form of those 3 ships. At this meeting, the white hegemonic patriarchal Western and heteronormative discourses on good and bad art were paired with parallelisms between the necessity of political art to be more aware of its visual character and the transcendental beauty of Caspar David Friedrich, the quintessential hero of Nazi Germany. When I address some salient aspects of this outrageous approach to art traditions, narratives, and practices that I will later analyze as epistemically violent with respect to my presence as a Black scholar and curator, my arguments were dismissed in a symptomatic manner. I will also explain later why the use of symptomatic, but first let me go back to this moment of not seeing it coming. In order to clarify the concept of the we and the other, a quintessential Kantian construction that differentiates between the anthropos and the man, which a philosopher found quite insulting on my part, I decided to start my lecture by presenting this video piece. And I will start a quote on Walter Mignolo's interpretation of this work. This 7 minutes video is composed of a montage of clips taken from Hollywood and Hollywood-type movies, where the anthropos, which are others, non-Euro-American whites, as conceptualized by Kant, around the world are portrayed. The first part, amasses a selection of confrontational situations in which white people are alarmed by the strange presence of the anthropos. The increscendo editing of the clips taken from different films is accompanied by a soundtrack taken from Guilo Pontecorvo, The Battle of Algeria of 1966. The soundtrack belongs to the moment in the film in which 4 Muslim women are changing their habitus and becoming European-looking. The reason for their transformation is to become the carriers of bombs that will be placed in the French quarters once they manage to cross the security line guarded by French soldiers. In the second part, the video collects scenes in which people of color, men and women, and white men and women fall in love with each other, or reach a situation in which the embrace of friendship and or passion dissipates the mutual fear and disrespect. However, love and friendship, as good as it seems, are always in the white man's imagination. People of color are portrayed. They do not have the opportunity to portray. The second part shows the generous inclusivity of white filmmakers who keep for themselves the privilege of being generous and inclusive. And it is this generosity of the activism of white European political art that permeated what I dare to name as symptomatic of the white savior industrial complex, quoting a writer, a Nigerian-American writer, Teju Cole. I will show you his description of this, his conceptualization of this complex later. Having been part as an activist of several spaces dealing with issues of migration and racialization in Europe, both in academia and in the arts, I am perfectly aware that the majority of white people, and let me add, white liberals, have a symptomatic reaction to their named whiteness. They either feel insulted or eventually protect themselves with what Gayatri Spivak has conceptualized as sanctioned ignorance, which translates into commonplaces such as, this is my philosophical tradition and this is how I learned to explain myself, etc. For the sake of building an argument based on what is already considered as a canonical text in European philosophical traditions, I refer to Jean-Paul Sartre's introduction to the Negritude Poets in 1948 with the emblematic essay Ofe Noir. This Eurocentric point of departure for my arguments is meant on the one hand to position this exercise in pedagogy as a means to facilitate the understanding of the gravity of the issues at stake in the context of that particular meeting. And on the other hand, to state my utmost commitment to forever avoid attempting to dismantle the so-called Eurocentric critique on Eurocentrism. This type of scholarship is by all means a blessing compared to the level of discourse presented in this meeting, where intersectionality, one of the main contributions of Black feminism that outlined the interdependence between gender, racialization, and class, played only the role of an excuse for mockery and trivialization. Actually, these sociological categories were completely absent in all of the presentations that, I repeat, discussed the role of political art, curating and funding it in Europe. Go figure. Sartre, the last European intellectual to engage in a systematic way with the aftermath of colonialism, chose to unlearn his privilege, to quote Spivak again, and conducted himself with a certain degree of transparency, always acknowledging his position as a white European and addressing his counterparts as constructed others. Very aware, Sartre was, of how to use the we and the them. After him came Foucault, Barthes et al., post-structuralism and limbo for any discussion that linked European modernity to its colonial enterprises. I will once again recur to the moving image to help me synthesize ideas that otherwise would require a much longer argumentation. After keeping Roland Barthes as the only white, heteronormative, hegemonic Christian patriarchal theoretician that my decolonial affiliation could still rescue and occasionally even quote, a documentary film about his grandfather's foundational role in the colony of Côte d'Ivoire, made Van Vincent Meze, it's called Vita Nova 2011 in case you want to take that note, has left me now without any excuses to renew my fidelity to his wonderful myths. And I shall miss them indeed. This film was the confirmation I was not looking for because it was way too painful, even for me as a Black scholar, to accept it. My suspicions on the deliberate concealing of colonialism in European contemporary philosophy, of what Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has conceptualized as the stories that Europe tells itself about its colonial past, are poetically embedded and dramatically substantiated in this documentary. Why did Barthes never discuss the role of his grandfather as a French colonial hero in his writings, and chose instead to reinvent himself as an anti-imperialist without any personal ties to this genocidal enterprise? Another strikingly similar episode on this phenomenon of not seeing it coming has taken place the last couple of weeks, took place in a series of email exchanges between me and the organizers of an Afropean film seminar, a screening program and collective decolonial learning platform I have conceptualized. This workshop took place 2 weeks ago at a contemporary art institution in Copenhagen. Before the final version of the 5 lines paragraph could be sent with the announcement in their newsletter, at least 8 emails were exchanged between the persons in charge of the newsletter and myself. It is absolutely mandatory to edit even shorter text than that. Actually, as we will know, the shorter the hardest. But in this case, what happened was that there were no terms in the Danish vocabulary of these indeed well-intentioned people for the category Black citizenship or Black diaspora. After being extremely polite by not sharing my irritation openly with the way that decolonial theory was summarized, I had to even be more patient with the relentless reduction of the term Black diaspora artist to the singular. Apparently, the term is so alien in contemporary arts in Denmark, or should I say in this particular institution, that it was impossible for my counterparts to even imagine it as a collective. They really do not see it coming. But the story gets even better. Out of respect for the sanctioned ignorance of my counterparts and the right to email privacy, I decided to honor our exchange and did not share those indeed very disturbing emails with the co-organizer of the seminar, the Copenhagen-based Black diaspora artist Janet Ehlers. When I finally confessed my irritation to her in person, she told me that she was consulted by the Contemporary Art Institution by phone on those puzzling concepts a number of times, and that she also has asked per email Simi Dule, a Danish-speaking South African member of what has become the working group Vivo Black Euro Body Politics, on this translation. I rest my case. Europe faces today the huge and undelayable task of looking herself at the mirror and learn to speak to herself with the right words, especially when talking about political art. The crisis, I'm going to start a quote of the title of an event, the crisis of European cosmopolitanism in the age of austerity, multiculturalism, and colonial legacies, is the title of a conference I have been invited to participate at the University of Warwick, Sociology Department, in December 2013. I will present a paper in a panel entitled Diasporas, Multiculturalisms, and European Identity. This session will examine how Europeanness needs to be thought through in the context of diasporic communities living in Europe. How, if at all, are diasporic communities shaping the way in which we understand what it is to be European? What are the impediments to this? Can diasporic communities living in Europe expand our understanding and experience of being European? What kinds of resistance are put against such expansions? Does engaging diaspora with debates around Europeanness have the potential to shift our understanding of, and perhaps challenge, the currently fashionable opposition to multiculturalism? This is the end of the description of this event. The group of mainly sociology scholars that organized this meeting have invited me a couple of times before to similar workshops since 2011. In other words, this type of discussions are already part of mainstream academia. So please bear with my authentic astonishment with the fact that I had to explain why using the we in a public lecture without reflection is a highly questionable practice by any standards, even in the symptomatically underdeveloped European human sciences. The Warwick meetings and the events that I organized as a curator have also done some damage to my understanding of the issues at stake. I have obviously lost contact with reality, and this type of wake-up call is a more than welcome opportunity to thank once again the contributions of so many scholars, artists, and activists in Europe that are working incessantly to create the inclusive and liberating dialogues, I would say also words, that are so urgently needed. Going back to the meeting where good art was discussed in terms of a so-called parameter of ambiguity, good art must always be ambiguous. That was the motto of one of the main presenters. And my decision to present myself as a curator of really bad, unambiguous art. I would like to clarify why the salvationist rhetoric of the civilizing mission of some European political art is extremely problematic by any standards. Nigerian American writer Teju Cole, on what we could call now Twitter theorization, coined the term white savior industrial complex in 2012, using this social media, and after that has expanded on his final reflections. He has written an essay about this. Connecting with the subject of this conference, which is American Wars, this theorization was, or his anger actually, was provoked by him watching this pseudo-documentary called Connie, that I deliberately did not watch, but I know of, and probably some of you know. So this is a reflection that stems from war thematics, just to make it even more. Hello. To outline how you could hopefully connect the ideas that I'm offering with what has already been discussed before. These are the 7 tweets. Oh, I forgot to show that, but you already saw the film. Okay. I'm going to trust your ability to follow me while I continue my... I will read another quote from Teju Cole. I find this although very accurate, otherwise I wouldn't be quoting it. But I think they're pretty heavy, so even me, I don't want to repeat them out loud. So I would read another paragraph of this essay. I open the quote. The white savior industrial complex is a valve for releasing the unbearable pressures that build in a system built on pillage. We can participate in the economic destruction of Haiti over long years, but when the earthquake strikes, it feels good to send $10 each to the rescue fund. I have no opposition in principle to such donations. I frequently make them myself. This is the author talking, but I must admit I also send money for that. But we must do such things only with awareness of what else is involved. If we're going to interfere in the life of others, a little due diligence is a minimum requirement. This lapidary statement by Teju Cole is a quintessential decolonial statement. I'm going to explain now what it is, decolonial. The decolonial option questions the very notion of universality and civilization, or rather the universality of civilization. The rhetoric of modernity and progress, key words to justify Western expansion, always carries a secret weapon, which is articulated through dispossession, exploitation, and ultimately genocide, coloniality. We saw almost literally in that order in the film that we just saw those elements. By exposing the notion of inseparability between modernity and coloniality, decolonial thinkers state that there's no such thing as an autonomous European Sonderweg of modernity. The colonial and its exploited, dispossessed, enslaved, and exterminated subjects have always played a crucial role in creating, defining, and leisurely feeding modernity. Decolonial aesthetics refers to ongoing artistic practices responding and delinking from coloniality, the darker side of modernity and imperial globalization. This concept emerged from the work of the collective Modernity, Coloniality, Decoloniality, based on the seminal conceptualization by Peruvian humanist and sociologist Aníbal Quijano. So mainly this group, we are from the Caribbean diaspora, also Latino in the US, but mainly Latin America, in Latin America. Since 1997, when I curated my first international exhibition entitled Insight into Otherness, presenting 5 contemporary Dominican artists in the Art Center, South Florida, questioning the universality of art without hyphenation, like the one that was referred to univocally at the discussed meeting, has been a central focus of my practice. This is why after the Duke University exhibition, Decolonial Aesthetic, curated by Walter Mignolo and co-curated by Marina Grissini, Guo Jing Hong, and myself, a very dynamic path opened that has made it possible for me to interact with dozens of colleagues in different parts of the world that engage with decolonial theory, one that consistently dismantles the notion of universality in a systematic way. You will notice in the following examples of my curatorial projects that their main preoccupations have been diasporic knowledge cultivation, migration, Caribbean borders, colonial legacies and their entanglements in the African continent, the Caribbean and Europe, racialization, identity constructions, citizenship, Black feminism, and the bilateral relations between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Although the artists I have collaborated with are generally used in different media, I tend to favor moving image and performance, time-based works. So you will notice that my investigative work as a trained journalist, as well as the literary and theoretical components of my approach to curating, are in permanent dialogue with each other. And that is why there is a substantial amount of time between my projects. I also describe my approach to method and methodology as inseparable. So now I'm going to be a bit colloquial, I hope, because we should see another. Okay, this is Insight into Otherness. This work by Mónica Ferreras, this is made of the bread that the original inhabitants of the Caribbean ate. They were exterminated by Columbus himself in the Dominican Republic, the first settlement of Europe in the Americas, where I come from. And so, yes, so this is also a homage to that genocide. This is also another homage to another genocide, which was ordered by a dictator we had in the Dominican Republic, one of the most well-known, sadly, Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, who ordered the killing, indiscriminate killing of people of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic. That was in 1937, and the word used to identify those Haitian people with Haitian accents or French accent was to ask them to repeat the word perejil, which they need to use the R. So if they pronounce it with a French accent, they would be killed on the spot. And on top of this installation by artist Elio Almonte, there was parsley, which is perejil, and underneath is on top and down there are two maps of the island, the same map of the island, and underneath there are bones and salts. And on the words that racializing categories that we used, still in use after colonial legacies. I would like to ask for your solidarity with the plight of Dominicans of Haitian descent that are now facing a terrible circumstance very, very similar to what happened in 1937, because the Dominican judiciary has ruled for the denationalization of people of Haitian descent. More than 200,000 people have now to prove that they are true Dominicans. And it's really apartheid in the 21st century. And it's consuming a lot of my time and energy, and a lot of us is a tragedy. It's a humongous tragedy, and I will ask I will notify you that while you use the platform of the Facebook page to upload information on this, and hopefully you will be motivated to sign petitions and support the cause of my fellow Dominicans. Folding the Caribbean is an utopian project that has not been done, and my idea with very accomplished Canadian-Mexican artist Rafael Lozano Hemer is to use very sophisticated technology to reproduce the borders in the Caribbean, like having people from each side of one border. Because in the Caribbean we have water borders, so for instance, the Dominicans, and I hope, yes, this is an example. We crossed to Puerto Rico, which is a U.S., the last colony, no, the oldest colony, the United States, and trying to reach Puerto Rico from the Dominican Republic is very dangerous. People do it without any protection. And in this performance, the artist teaches the community where they travel the most from this point, Sabana de la Mar, into how to use a lifesaver. But at the same time, the documented action is online, actually, the video. She talks with them, with the community, and draws the stories, and draws some drawings inspired by the narratives of the tragedies that their families have endured. This is, until now, the only Dominican Haitian photography show. I'm very, very happy about this project. It is more meaningful than ever now. It has been presented here in Berlin in 2004, I think it was, at the Amerikanistik Institute, and this is the Goethe Institute in Lomé. This is artist Cesar Martinez from Mexico. He makes this ritual of anthropophagy. He makes this sculpture is made of chocolate, and this is his own body. It's the mold. This is his own body, and this is the place where he's doing this. We did this performance twice in Santo Domingo. In this occasion, he's at the first marketplace for enslaved people of the Americas. So it's an homage to them, and also to the community that's still very marginalized. This is Josefina Baez, and she lives in New York, and this is a performance where she mixes kuchipudi, sacred Indian dance, with her own poetry, and talking about becoming adapted or, yes, integrated into American culture in New York. So a lot of you that probably know Spanish, Pope in Spanish is spelled the same as potato. So this is a game of words. This performance deals with, on the one hand, the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church, and on the other hand, the hypocrisy of politicians that always go to marginalized areas and offer people everything and then disappear. In this performance, the artist is carrying behind his bicycle a shrine, a box with a pope, with a potato. And he's distributing vouchers, equivalent of 5 pounds of potato, so that people would go on that same evening to pick them up at the Museo de Arte Moderno, the Modern Art Museum. So people did come, they believed in the premise, and the most astonishing thing was that they were very organized, silent. It's like nobody had to tell them anything. So it was a very intense experience. We had to have police escort to make way. It was a very, very ambitious project. It was very, very successful. Maria Deren, that you see in the center here, is my favorite filmmaker. She is also an expert. She died, but she was an expert in Haitian voodoo, and wrote a book about it. But the footage that she shot in Haiti, she didn't have enough money to edit, and in the end, as one of her husbands edited, Divine Horseman is a film. This is not that film. This is Atlant. She only had 6 films, and she's a pioneer of avant-garde cinema in the United States, and also a theoretician on her own. This is True Stories to Success, a feminist undercover show because sometimes I just don't say exactly what I'm doing, but I know what I'm doing. They're only women. And it was done here in Berlin in 2009. And this is the cover of my master's thesis, which is the beginning and the conceptualization of Black Eurobody politics, because I was almost denied my degree because my subject was exposing racism in the press, and of course there's no racism. I always joke that we have racism everywhere in the world except in 2 countries. You want to know which ones? Germany and the Netherlands, because you're not allowed to talk about them. So yeah, I succeeded, and I decided they're not going to silence me, and I continued and put together this project that eventually came into being, but it took a lot of hard work. So now I'm going to argue, as I said, now it's back to theory, 2 concepts that are central to my presentation, namely Afropean decolonial aesthetics and art plantations of modernity. There are several conceptualizations of diaspora aesthetics in post-colonial studies in what has been called the Age of Diaspora. Cobbin and Mercer has published extensively on the subject since the 80s. Other contributions include Alexander Vehilille's Afro-diasporic aesthetics. Do you remember him? He was here. Alexander Vehilille. He presented in the Cross-Current, yeah? And Krista Thompson's African diasporic forms. These theoretical approaches share a common thread with the seminal essays on diaspora and cultural representation by Stuart Hall. They also share a dialogical stamina in their analysis. The authors systematically choose to articulate their ideas by focusing on specific cultural practices instead of establishing yet another abstract universal. In other words, these are situation-specific conceptualizations comme il faut. In the case of Thompson, the focus is given to the social status performed in the hip-hop inspired prom rituals in the Bahamas. Vehilille, accompanied by Du Bois, Walter Benjamin, and Ralph Ellison, introduces sonic Afro-modernity as an indicator of the disjuncture between sound and source exemplified by souls. In Cobbin and Mercer's paradigmatic reflections on diaspora aesthetics, moving image plays a relevant role. Many of the works presented during Bebop 2012 and 2013 share with those of early Black British filmmakers analyzed by Mercer the confounding of stereotypes and the displacement of common assumptions of an essentialized Black identity. What differentiates the works of Bebop from those studied by Mercer is a rather bizarre element, the fact that Black filmmakers in Britain did not have to prove that colonialism and imperialism actually happened, or, as in the case of the Netherlands, that since colonialism and imperialism happened so long ago, they are treated as ultimately irrelevant. The contribution of Afropean decolonial aesthetics to current conceptualizations of diaspora aesthetics is to illuminate the way in which diaspora creators address the occlusions concealed by modernity that hide the dirty job of coloniality. In this sense, our presence in what Quincy Garrio has described as modern art plantations, and I paraphrase as the art plantations of modernity, is neither tangential nor incidental. It is indeed this inescapable plantation system mentality, superbly argued by Antonio Benítez Rojo in La Isla que se repite, the repeating island, the Caribbean, and the postmodern perspective, that artists from the Caribbean and other Black diasporas have chosen to challenge. They challenge its coloniality of knowledge and being. The video collage Other that we just saw is a masterpiece in this regard. Afropean decolonial aesthetics assumes the Caribbean diaspora as organically implied in Black and or African diasporas in Europe. There is a vast global bibliography on diaspora studies, and particularly in Europe, situation-specific resemantizations of the terms are mushrooming all over the place. For the sake of clarity, I will quote the definition of Agustín Laumontes of an African diaspora, since it feels closer to my own experience as a member of the Caribbean diaspora. This I'm reading out loud because I love it. It is the world historical field that we now call the African diaspora as a condition of dispersal and as a process of displacement is founded on forms of violence and terror that are central to modernity. It also signifies a cosmopolitan project of articulating the diverse histories of African peoples while creating translocal intellectual currents and political movements. The decolonial in aesthetics, I close that quote as you notice, the decolonial in aesthetics substantiates the notion that we are and always have been part of modernity. This is why our strategies of re-existence are analyzed as an integral part of modernity. Instead of defining ourselves as other modernities, we call ourselves decolonized coloniality. The following quote by Stuart Hall is illustrative of a key contestation of decolonial thinking and aesthetics with respect to post-colonial and cultural studies. Thinking about my own sense of identity, I cite the quote, thinking about my own sense of identity, I realized that it has always depended on the fact of being a migrant, on the difference from the rest of you. So one of the fascinating things about this discussion is to find myself centered at last. Now, in the postmodern age, you all feel so dispersed. I become centered. What I've thought as dispersed and fragmented comes paradoxically to be the representative modern experience. This is coming home with a vengeance. End of the quote. From the decolonial perspective, we have never abandoned home coloniality. The process of decolonization of our minds involves a realization of this fact. We have always been here as the hidden side of modernity. Therefore, our presence is self-explanatory. Self-agency, on the other hand, is something that decolonial thinking and doing shares with Hall's dictum, since ultimately our recognition in the mirroring mirages of modernity unites us in solidarity. Furthermore, Afropean decolonial aesthetics embraces Hall's burden of representation as a most welcome gift. As in Hall's predicament during Bebop 2012 and 13, we became centered in our own experiences within a pan-European context. We talked between ourselves about ourselves. It was a banquet of identities. The so-called post-racial, post-identity, or post-black eras were oxymorons in our vocabulary. Let me take a little breath here. Should I cut my presentation a little bit? No? Okay. I still have another 50 minutes. Is that okay? Okay, let me stop 1 second to introduce Teresa Maria Diaz-Nerio, who's here. She's my very good friend. And she's performing this same piece here as part of the Herb Salon that is inaugurating the Gorky Theaters, the new intendant, Shermin Langhoff. From 6:30, isn't it?
Every day at 6:30 till the 17th.
Until the 17th. So you are welcome. In case you don't know who Sarah Bartman is, do you know any of you who Sarah Bartman is? The Hottentot Venus? Fantastic. Lots of learning to do. So, Teresa, at Bebop, artists, activists, and scholars shared their knowledge. Should I say quickly who she was?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I should. She just told me. Don't dismiss me. Okay, this woman was from part of South Africa, and she was Khoisan, and she came here on her own will to Europe, and she was part of tradition that is actually still very vibrant, especially in Germany, of showing exotic people as animals. And we on and off come with his protests against zoos in Germany, trying to have African villages there. So she had a very tragic life, and she ended dying in Paris. She was just, looked at as an object, and but she was talented. She was very, very good. She was a good singer, and she could play an instrument or a couple of instruments. And she died in Paris, and her body, because the pseudoscientists were obsessed with her genitalia, was completely dismembered. Somehow, I think it was a writer. It was a man who discovered her in Paris at a museum, the rest, and a campaign started to return her body, her dismembered body, to South Africa. It was successful. So now she has a dignified burial, and she's a symbol for black feminists and for black women, and very, very important for the new South Africa, because they made her an icon of, recovering and traces and acknowledging the violence that they have endured, that we have endured. So let me continue. At Bebop, artists, activists, and scholars shared their knowledge on equal terms during rich and diverse discussions. Film and video art were equated in status. The industrial character of the former shared the same screening format and setup as the later. Visual performance as art from black diaspora practitioners was presented and discussed at a postmodern experimental theater space. The scholarly work of theoreticians was discussed as an extra academic space. Activists were given plenty of space to display their campaigns and spread their message. These events have created a paradigm shift in decolonial sensing, thinking, and doing. The pervasive colonial amnesia in Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavian countries skillfully illustrates a pan-European scenario of the denial of coloniality, the denial of the systematic involvement in the financial network of the transatlantic enslavement trade, and later in the Berlin Africa Conference of 84-85 are just two examples. Since artists in different European locations thoroughly engage with these historical vacuums, my choice to connect them with my own curatorial praxis responds to what Erna Brodberg has described as the continent of black consciousness, but from the situation of living in Europe and not in the Caribbean. Therefore, the particularization of Afropean is meant to signal the emergence of black consciousness in Europe from a Pan-Africanist perspective. Bebop 2013, entitled Decolonizing the Cold War, was dedicating, or like Viola really very well said, the Cold War, was dedicated to exposing how the black body as a space of dignity, power, and beauty permeated the radical imagination of artists and thinkers in Europe beyond racial divides. We talked about the legacies of Angela Davis, a former student of Herbert Marcuse, and Richard Wright, who first published Black Power in London, inspired by Pan-Africans such as George Padmore and Kwame Nkrumah. The decolonial in Afropean decolonial aesthetics acknowledges our common struggle against coloniality, materialized in chilling examples of systematic racialization and persecution of people of African descent in Europe, which will be discussed further on. Together in this decolonial journey of thinking, mind, and sensing decolonization, we are not only demanding retribution from the colonial legacies in Africa, we are also outlining the continuities of these legacies in coloniality, that is, in colonialism without colonies. European coloniality is present in a brand new institution called Frontex. Do you know about Frontex? That's great. Some do, some don't, but that's good that many of you know, because it's evil. An external and internal borders program founded in 2005 with the fastest growing budget in the European Union. So there's a lot of precarity, but not for Frontex. For the arts and culture and education and all that. A European Union that was first known and conceptualized as inseparable from the exploitation of Africa and therefore named by its founders as Eurafrica, it is indeed there are indeed irrefutable historical continuities between the Berlin Africa Conference, that you of course all know about, yes, where the entire African continent was divided in 84-85 here in this city, and current mappings of migration routes in the African continent. This border externalization initiative could be defined as a de facto cartographic war operationalized by Frontex against Africa, and adds up to the relevance of Afropean as a tool to reveal the current entanglements of coloniality in Europe. So I had the word war in my text. Not bad. Afropean announces these realities and goes beyond mere reflection by inverting the order of these two components. They say Eurafrica and I say Afropean from our own community tale. Paradoxically, the African presence in Europe is older than in the Americas. The still contested 800 years of African occupation of the Iberian Peninsula is a case in point. And negritude, the epigram that contributed to the liberation of the African continent in the so-called short century, was invented in Paris in the 1930s, where also one of the 5 European Pan-African Congress were held. The first Pan-African Conference took place in London in 1900. Another ground for the pertinence of Afropean in relation to diaspora aesthetics and diaspora studies in general is that, unlike in the US, the UK, the Caribbean, and Latin America, the black diaspora in continental Europe cannot comfort itself with being an accepted community within the nation at large, not even a pathologized one. In this regard, this is why they don't even have a name for black citizenship in Denmark. In this regard, the Afropean brings the black or Afro community into a particular resonance with respect to diaspora studies. It has a related but distinct place vis-a-vis hegemonic US-focused academic discourses, and also in relation to black British cultural studies, a la Stuart Hall. Likewise, with regards to its demarcation within diaspora studies, Afropean in relation to decolonial aesthetics clarifies the particular challenge of establishing the fact that colonialism actually did happen in the first place. In the Americas, where the term decolonial aesthetics was coined, this is self-explanatory to the point of absurdity. However, in our European realities, it is absolutely the opposite. Afropean is meant to optimize the dialogical understanding between two processes of mental decolonization with common objectives and a shared African and European colonial legacy, but very different canonical historiographies. As previously argued, the systematic historical erasure of colonial legacies after the Berlin Africa Conference is exemplary of this situation. To give a revealing example, there are no monuments in Berlin that commemorate this outlandish event. And to even be more recalcitrant, let's us remember the above invisibilization of black studies in Europe in all the representations of political art of the discussed conference, how I started my presentation today. Which reminds me that until now I have failed to explain how the notion of epistemic violence, also coined by Spivak, permeated my interactions with some of the main speakers. The invisibilization, the erasure of black scholarship in Europe from Césaire to Fanon and Laure, Hall and Mercer renders my own work as utterly unworthy of discussion. Hereby, I also promise to never criticize again Hans Ulrich Obrist, who's a very, very famous white curator. You know him? His fanatical involvement with Caribbean thinker Edouard Glissant, based on the fact that among the myriads of exhibitions he has curated, he has never included a Caribbean artist. Never mind Hans Ulrich Obrist, you are from now on mega cool on my list. promise. Additionally, Afropean is also aimed at expanding awareness on the alarmingly growing Afrophobia of continental Europe and a strictly Kantian conceptualization. Here's a self-explanatory quote from the African philosopher, already deceased, very young, Emmanuel Chukudi Etse, in his extraordinary essay, The Color of Reason. I'm also not going to read this because I think you have been extremely patient, and I see that you're interested, but I don't want to abuse that. I've been talking for quite a long, so I will hope that you can follow me what I read, because I'm still going to talk about the content of this. As Walter Mignolo explains, indeed, I open the quote, indeed philosophical aesthetics was and still is a conceptual apparatus to control, include and exclude sensing sensibility, and to shape the population aesthetics, was clearly linked to the national state emerging project in Europe at the end of the 18th century. It was necessary to shape the tastes of the citizens parallel to civic education. Kant was not only influential in shaping aesthetics principles, he was decisive in shaping epistemology and in lining up the modern university of the Enlightenment, which we are immersed with still until today. The contest of the faculties remains as a pillar for the organization of the secular field of knowledge. It was indeed a potent move to take away the control of education from the church and the monarchy, and to form the sensibility of the emerging ethno-class, the white, German, and European bourgeoisie. In discussing, I close that quote and I'm going to open another one. In discussing the role played by bebop within the Kantian these Kantian epistemic continuities, Mignolo adds, I open, times have changed. We are here because you were there, as the dictum goes, to understand the historical logic of coloniality, hidden under the rhetoric of civilization, progress and development of modernity. Europe is not only in the most spectacular political economic crisis, but it is also being radically transformed by the rumor of the disinherited. Kant couldn't have imagined at that time that his ideas in observations and the contest will be contested by people, now European residents and citizens, who he can't consider lesser human and far away. End of quote. As Quincy Gario so cheerfully exposes in his performance campaign, Zwarte Piet is Racism, right now in the Netherlands. It's a huge, finally, open discussion, I would say, greatly due to this performance project by Quincy Gario. You're from there? There you go. A demeaning caricature of blackness is valued as an unchangeable, innocent cultural heritage in the Netherlands, utterly unrelated to colonialism, which, as we know, happened too long ago to even now matter anymore. Blackface is also institutionalized in Germany as a respectable theatrical tradition. The infamous Swedish cake, do you know about this cake? Good. And countless alarming examples on racial profiling, police harassment, and random murders of African immigrants in Greece are just the tip of the iceberg. Adding to these symptomatic examples, I must admit that in spite of consistently trained political awareness, the hate speech and prosecution of Somali communities in Sweden, the deaths under police custody in Germany. Actually, the cover of my master thesis is about the burning of Ori Jallo. You know this case, right? The legal prescription of anti-white racism in France. There's such thing as anti-white racism in France now. The kidnapping of legal residency documents to Afro-Spanish citizens by the police, and a long list of unthinkable acts still take many of us by surprise. Black Europe and the African diaspora are indeed living extremely dangerous moments of coloniality and need as much solidarity as we can humanly get. Diaspora Spiritual Revolutions, and this is my last paragraph, is the title of Bebop 2014. As I have explained, previous Bebop events have engaged European audiences in intricate detail with the outrage generated by Black African diaspora peoples when confronting a racist world order structured along the lines of coloniality. An Afropean sensibility reaches out to gather diverse diaspora cosmologies and spiritual forms of knowing in order to illuminate the experiences of the black body in Europe. African baptism and Methodism, Ethiopianism, Orisha, Pentecostal, Rastafari, and Voodoo meet at this crossroads with a decolonizing agenda to sanctify liberation on earth. It's time for us to save ourselves. And that will be a process that will impact upon everyone, hence its universality. That is what Bebop 2014 is about, repositioning the non-secular in the White House, reminding it of its hidden myths, of its symptomatic Barthian denials and vacuums. Thank you very much.
For questions and comments now? No?
I have a question about Afropean identity and practices. I'm not sure if I understood everything correctly because it was a lot of theory I tried to follow, but maybe that's why I'm asking. So, would you say that Afropean practices or Afropean identity could be a way to stop white Europe from externalizing the topic of race and from externalizing the Afropean presence or black identities and Europeans of color, like to some outer place, and to keep saying, Europe is actually white and Europe isn't really racist and this European identity works like this. So do you think, or did I understand correctly, that Afropean practices could sort of help to make people realize that actually this is all really stupid and racist and this externalization has to stop?
More than that, it's about self-affirmation, because I think what the white people should do, that part of this is really stupid and it should stop. That's not our homework. Our homework really is about self-affirmation. And Afropean as a concept, as a term, I'm not the first one using it. I'm the first one using it in connection to the colonial theory. But once, when I first came up to this, because I was trying to look for a term that would be new, like I said, and that would represent my own praxis and also what I see reflected of my own interest in the works of other artists such as Teresa here and others in Bebop. I even consulted some of my colleagues, and some were against, some were, but in the end I did a Google search, I couldn't find it. Once I wrote the essay, I found it all over the place. And so there are Afropean musical events, so it's more associated with pop culture. So it's not that I invented Afropean, but I am appropriating or resemantizing it, to make a point on the self-affirmation strategies of European black diaspora artists that address issues of colonialism and erasure of colonial legacies and erasure of that, and also erasure of their own history of being in Europe. Because in Fatima El Tayeb, that I think you already have somehow studied here, she's the pioneer thinker and historian that has documented the African presence, the African diaspora presence for 300 years in Germany. It's just like it goes back to many generations, so centuries. So Kant was instrumental in creating the anthropos and racializing the rest of the world from his very comfortable place in Königsberg, which he never left. And this, in the context of this conference that I am criticizing very harshly, I hope, it's reproduced in art history, in discussions about art. It's taken for granted that Western European art is art. Everything else needs a hyphenation. So for them to even, it's like Hello, No, that's European art. And this is why you need to acknowledge and to go into what theories created aesthetics. And this is what Walter Mignolo has done very, very well. And before him, not related to art but to philosophy, this amazing essay by Emmanuel Chukwu-Dietse on the importance of Kant's race theory, which is completely dismissed or ignored or unknown in philosophy in general.
Other questions, comments?
Which theory you just mentioned is unknown in philosophy?
Excuse me?
Which theory is unknown in philosophy?
The essay of Emmanuel Chukwu-Dietse starts precisely describing the surprise of fellow philosophers. What? Akustan. When he explains that when he was in the phase of researching his work, and he said, I'm studying the racial theories of Kant, people thought, what are you talking about? People didn't understand. People didn't even know. But Kant lectured more about what he called anthropology, which actually he invented, and that's his last book on anthropology. And also aesthetics, So he started, but basically what he lectured most on was on the relationship between what he called human geography and moral philosophy. What it is that we should be, and why is the white European model the model to be followed? Of like we all have. He came from Rousseau. Well, let me not get into too philosophical because I'm really a philosopher. I love philosophy, but I hope I answered your question.
Okay, then I would have a question, but maybe it's super or too personal, and I'm sorry if it is so. What you just said about self-affirmation, and it's not your job giving white people their homework, what they should do, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that, but at the same time, you are lecturing and you are creating all those events. So, do you find yourself in like tensions between not seeing what you do as like something you do for white people to educate them, but at the same time, maybe you still want to, you want white people to listen to your talks, don't you? So do you find yourself in this tension somehow?
It's a fabulous question. Congratulations. I think I dropped it to see whoever reacted. I'm happy you did. I am constantly immersed in that dichotomy. I think, or that tension, or not dichotomy. I think, let me see if I can explain it to myself first. With an example, I conceptualize Afropean film seminars to empower black students, black art students, black diaspora students in different contexts in Europe. So they would learn that there are other black diaspora artists and that to relate with their work and to have this knowledge that is completely absent in the curricula. That was my main inspiration. But I have taught this seminar already three or four times, and the only time I had more people of color was in Middelburg in Holland with Walter Mignolo and Rolando Vázquez. But the other ones are basically all white audience. So it has been fantastic. I mean, we experienced epistemic shifts. These readings and the work has really created amazing moments of reflection and self-criticism, and for white people. So I would say that from my self-affirmation, I educate white people. So it's like one thing that it's like a natural consequence. But yes, I think it's always important, because this is an Audre Lorde concept, it's not mine, that she said that the notion of white feminists, of always expecting to be educated was in itself reproducing the violence of the master-slave dialectics, because it is not our job to educate white people. White people should educate themselves about their lack of knowledge of certain areas. But of course, it's not like exclusive. And I am developing as we talk. So I think I have my first public confrontation with that tension, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Yeah?
I'm so glad that the discussion went in this direction, because I wanted to take it a bit further, but I wasn't sure how to formulate my question, and I think now I have a better idea. When you talk, I can't remember, what was the term about sort of self-satisfied, institutionalized ignorance that you used?
It's called sanctioned ignorance. Sanctified is a good Freudian slip.
Yeah.
No, but sanctioned ignorance. And that's a concept developed by Gayatri Spivak. And she says, she uses it to summarize the constant excuses that the establishment finds not to engage with the sort of knowledge that we bring up into this table. So
this is more talking about things from a political or community perspective, and not from an everyday personal perspective. Yes.
Where are you trying to go, my dear?
No, it's difficult, but I see that the problems between people with different experiences, let's say, different life experiences based on the way they look, is also something that has to be rectified through personal relationships and not just on a governmental level or something having to do with legality or social programs. And I wonder if you can propose some way of moving forward in that way.
Well,
because I see, this sort of sanctified ignorance. For me, the kind of knowledge that we need to seek is often a knowledge that can only come from experience, not one that can come from reading books or from listening to lectures. And I don't know how to get around that, because I can only have my experience as a white person.
yes.
I can never understand what it's like to know that somebody's looking at you funny because of the way, because of your skin color. Because I'm almost always living in a place where the way I look is majority.
Yes.
Not always the case, but even so, if I'm living in a place where people's skin is generally darker than mine, they look at me funny, but it's a different kind of funny look. So it feels like there's no way to move beyond personal experience, and I wonder how limited is our possibility to get beyond that ignorance, given that.
Because I don't want the rest of us to think that we are having a private conversation, I'm going to expose you. My friend Amari Barash is the translator of my novel, and we have had this discussion before about she living in Pankow and how it is to that a common friend of ours that's African American relates her presence there. So I think that on a personal level, you just said something very useful. I cannot know what it feels like. You can't. That's it. This is what Audre Lorde teaches us. Acknowledging that you can't, because this is also part of white hegemony, It's the mentality that...
It hurts because
No, it doesn't. Listen.
I can never have this knowledge.
Maybe it hurts, but listen. It's not dismissing your feelings or your authenticity, the authenticity of your emotions, but try to figure that white hegemony, one of the most salient aspects of it, or discursively, is the notion that white people have to understand everything. You don't have to understand everything. Some things you cannot understand. What's the problem with that? Just acknowledge that. You cannot understand everything. Some experiences cannot be understood on your own terms. And this is what Audre Lorde is so balsamic, so healing, because she tells us, as white and black feminists, please, don't even pretend that you know how it is. No, she doesn't say that. Oops, sorry, oh the Lord. She's really very conciliatory, I would say. What she's saying is like, please understand that first you need to hear, to listen to our difference. Acknowledge that we are different, because trying not to talk about it is not going to solve the problem. So first just acknowledge our difference, and but through acknowledging our differences is that we can really engage in our commonalities, but acknowledging our differences. And that is not denying your capacity for empathy. On the contrary, it just gives it another quality. You can still feel empathy and without understanding fully what it means. I hope I helped.
Yeah, it's not, but empathy also has a not very positive ring to it, no? I mean, empathy for me implies that I feel bad for someone who is experiencing something negative from an outside point of view. But I suppose I felt like much of what you have said today has to do with knowledge in an institutional sense and in a political sense, which of course is what it was about. But I feel like there's no way to gain the requisite knowledge without going to the core of individual personal experience. And so I wondered how you might address this differently if you were coming at it from that perspective.
I think I have already exposed a lot of what the process has been. When I say, for example, when I said that during Bebop we talk between ourselves, to ourselves, to ourselves. It was like our identities, our struggle. It all comes from a very, very personal narrative.
Yeah.
It's not an abstraction of a theory. So everything that I write and I said today is kind of everyday life for me, you know, and so I find it. I don't know if it should be. Well, it's intriguing for me because according to me, I write so that everybody understands, because I'm a trained journalist and I have the ambition to be understood. So when you theorists and trained people like Isabel are challenged, I go like, I still need to do more of my homework, because these are concepts that I have been working for a while now, and my main ambition is to have them resonate and be understood. But at least I think I am on the point of resonating. Understood fully, not quite, but what can I say? I theorize because I think this is one also the purposes of Bebop was to connect scholars that were working already on issues of racialization and citizenship, but not talking about art, because contemporary art is not their field, period. Because then artists, in their practices, their work is analyzed, discussed by white thinkers and art historians that have no context, really, theoretically. So their work continues to be misrepresented, misunderstood, and so on. So it has been very successful in that way. Also, the putting together of these two groups of people, and now people that had never written about art are talking about art. And nobody has asked me why I engage with art. Well, let me ask myself and answer myself. It is because in academia, in scholarship, you need to prove your case and wait until some professor or somebody comes with an idea that is sanctified, legitimized, canonized, blah, blah, blah. Whereas in arts, very, very urgent issues could find a space to be talked about in a more fluidic way. And even though it has a lot of limitations, and we are involved in the arts, we are most of the time very critical of it, as you heard, it still has that potential. So.
Maybe a totally different topic, but I was really interested in what you said about the experience of Haitian immigrants to the Dominican Republic, and that they would face such a level of exclusion and discrimination, I suppose also from official levels, or from a government level. And I know a little bit about the history of Haiti. I know that under the Duvalier regime, a lot of Haitians fled to the Dominican Republic. And what I don't quite understand is why do they face this kind of discrimination? Is it because of the language barrier that people in the Dominican Republic speak Spanish while Haitians speak, well, Haiti and French? Or is there also another reason why it's feasible for the Dominican government to exclude Haitian immigrants or denationalize them? Was that too tricky?
No, not tricky at all.
Okay.
Not tricky at all. How long do you want to stay
I know it's a lengthy topic, but
First of all, Haitians speak Creole, not French.
I see.
That's a clarification. We in the Dominican Republic had a very different. Both countries are product of colonialism. When the United States invaded us for the first time in 1917 and occupied the entire island on the Dominican Republic until 1931, I think it was, on Haiti a little bit longer. They was a boom of the sugar industry, the sugarcane industry, and they started exploiting also the Dominican side and brought a lot of Haitian workers. That's when the massive contract of Haitians in the Dominican Republic started. After the Americans left, we continued the same practice, and the logic has been is modernity, coloniality. We needed them to become modern, to make modernize our economy, and then they stayed without any rights in the Dominican Republic as virtual slaves, or like I hear a very sophisticated term, forced labor, which is not forced labor, it's just the level of underpayment and the conditions are virtual slavery. That was in 1931, right? So after that, the legislation has been consistently ruled in order to keep them in that status of non-citizens. So somehow 2 or 3 generations have passed. They are resilient, and there is solidarity in the Dominican Republic and groups, so they have somehow managed to have Dominican papers as nationals. So now, because of many factors, I would say one of them is the electoral thing that they're only thinking about keeping power. We have now a party dictatorship that has all the different parts of the judiciary, the executive, and the ¿cuáles son los 3 poderes? El poder judicial, poder ejecutivo. Sorry?
No?
What?
Legislative?
Thank you. Legislative. They're all in their hands. So they have like a corporation now. And this corporation finds it's very profitable to strip these people from their legal status as Dominicans, because they are already maybe 1.6% or could decide, or maybe less than that, but could be decisive on their losing the elections in 2016. So they have done something that has served many different evil purposes with this ruling. There is a Dominican notion of identity that systematically constructs itself as more from Spain than African. And because of this ideology, we have that has been brainwashed in the mentality of people that we're not black, we're not black, we're not black, we're not black. Blacks are the Haitians. It comes also from the very first period of colonialism, that Haiti was the wealthiest of all colonies of Europe, and they had 500,000 enslaved people from the African continent. 500,000. That's 500,000 people enslaved. And on the Dominican side, we only had 30,000. So the difference in economic exploitation and capitalism is very significant. While Haiti was depredated, we were not. We were still, we were the first Spanish colony in the Americas, the first European settlement. So we were completely forgotten by Spain because they have found already Mexico and the continent and the silver and all that. So lucky for us, they forgot about us, they couldn't care less. But that part of the island was given to France because of all the treaties they were signing. Every time they were signing a treaty having that happened in the entire Caribbean. So it remained French, we remained Spanish. Our independence is not from Spain, it's from Haiti, because Haiti is the first black republic, became free, and then they liberated us from enslavement, and after 22 years we decided we don't want to be under Haitian rule anymore, and we became an independent country from Haiti. So there are, like I said, how long do you want to stay? I hope I gave you some salient aspects of this extremely horrific situation now, because what this ruling has done is anti-constitutional, and it has steered the worst in Dominicans, and I'm actually already have become a Dominican in transit. This is my new identity, and also an epistemic Haitian, because I am ashamed of being Dominican. I'm ashamed of being Dominican, and this situation, now if you want me to get even more personal, has really affected my praxis, my notion of what I have to do now as a curator and as a thinker. I don't know how relevant it is that I continue doing bebop, for example. I am questioning myself, in this context, what am I doing? I mean, I am very involved with activists in the Dominican Republic and in the diaspora dealing with this. It's an extremely shameful situation. It's tragic. It's a huge tragedy. Because this ruling is irrevocable.
No. Is it?
If Teresa hasn't been involved, as you can see.
I have been reading a lot about it. I don't think it is.
Okay, Teresa, it is.
But I don't know, you know more about it, of course.
I do. I
But
said
I don't know, I mean,
it's irrevocable.
it seems to be like
No.
que la mitad de la población está en contra de eso. O sea.
No. They are claiming that the majority is for it. Yes, who do you think elected Hitler? The majority. No? Hitler was elected by the majority.
He would have come anyway without an election.
What does the majority argument have to do in this issue? You know what I mean? Yeah, the majority are genocidal creatures. Oh well, fine.
So the majority of the Dominican population supports the ruling party,
Yes, of
which
course.
is anti-Haiti.
Absolutely. And that is extremely painful because I see my own friends. We signed a paper, a document supporting a committee. We are a committee now. We have finally become a committee of Dominicans and in the island and outside, supporting the denationalized Dominicans, right? These Dominicans with Haitian background. And I read the 250 names, and I feel so lonely because there's not one person I went to school with, nobody from my family, and nobody from my closest friends. I have
Do they
new
live
friends
in
now.
the Dominican Republic, and would they face persecution if they sign something like this, in contrast to you who
Of
live
course,
in Germany?
we
and
all
Germany?
face them. I mean, people. I'm writing about it because I'm a journalist. I write there, and they post the most hateful stuff on the comments. So we have hate speech that has been sanctified. There are people asking for us, traitors of the patria. ¿Cómo se dice eso
No.
in English?
Of the country.
Yet we are traitors of the Dominicanness. We are no longer Dominicans for them. So this is why, to put it even more to their face, I said, do not call me pro-Haitian. That insults me. I'm Haitian. Because they want to invalidate you because you are against them and telling me you're not Dominican. Thank you. I don't want to be Dominican. If it's been like you, I'm not Dominican. But of course, this is come from a privileged position because I have a Dominican passport. I can always be Dominican. I am Dominican. but it's just to make a point. You know what I mean? I don't know what to say. I cry all the time. This is like, I have a huge headaches all of a sudden in the middle of the night that wake me up. And I feel guilty for feeling guilty, because I say, like, it's very sad. It's, Facebook, for example, you see how people that you thought I thought were, like, not even progressive or liberal, like, normal, humans, thinkers, saying the most horrible things. Oh, I have to close the door because if my cat goes out, then the Haitian workers outside will eat it.
Oh my
Stuff
gosh.
like that. That's nothing. So please sign whatever I'm going to send you, because it's beyond words. It's beyond words what we are witnessing. It's like you're living right now the night of the crystals, the broken crystals, right now in the Dominican Republic. We don't know when the first person is going to be killed. You know what I mean? That starts this thing. It's so dangerous. Yeah.
And do you think that anti-Haitian movement developed out of, let's say, historical revenge for being under Haitian rule and now claiming a superior position to someone who was, in terms of law or stateship, in a higher rank or at a better position?
Well, you have just described the rhetoric
Yeah.
of those nationalists with a C,
Yeah.
because that's how they play it, They also killed us in such and such year, and they did also a massacre, and but what it all is hidden is that these people that we are denationalizing, thanks to them, we became. We have the industry that we have. It's like the contribution, and they have lived in the most incredibly terrible conditions, and it's an act of utmost cruelty. It's the most cynical thing imaginable. So, if I want to bring a positive note, because or optimist note, I would say that I was interrupted. I was saying that I have found new friends. I mean, even old enemies are now my friends, because I'm a public figure and I have public confrontations with people. And now that I see they're supporting this the same cause that I am, I feel like, wow, I'm so happy, because we have a different beginning, I would say. As part of the intellectual class there, but like the opposite is more. I think it's heavier for me to see how many people are so radically, so banally, so fast. So this is what it has helped me understood a lot of things about German history. Witnessing this is like I understand now how people were like tied up, because the minute that something tragic happens, all Dominicans are going to get the same blame. Nobody's going to come and say, "Oh, I know you're a cool Dominican." It's like the whole country. But like I said, that's not the main concern. The main concern is these people's lives.
Thank you
So my
so
question
much.
has been answered.
Mm-hmm. Sorry?
Thank you so much for addressing this very important topic and sharing your thoughts with us.
Of course. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for coming.